Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel we post writing tips, unboxings, book hauls, book reviews and the occasional vlog. And today I have not one, not two, but 5 comic book reviews. And today we're discussing 1 to 5 of the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. If you haven't already seen, I've already reviewed volume 1 of the Sandman by Neil Gaiman. If you haven't seen that, the link is above me now. I'll just do a brief run through of this one. But as for the other 4 Sandman comics, I have not reviewed them yet, and I decided why just read 1 comic book when, because they're so short, you can just go full honk and do 5 in one go. I will read you guys the blurbs of each one as we come to them, and I will then review that section and then overall review at the end. If you have not read the Sandman series, do not watch this video if you care about spoilers, because as a comic, I don't think I can talk about it without having the main plot twists in there, because there's not that much in there. It is a comic. I will repeat, there will be spoilers in this video. If you do not want any spoilers for the Sandman comic series, do not watch this video. If you don't care because you've read Sandman or you don't mind spoilers, then stay tuned. Before we get into today's video, don't forget, if you like what you see, to subscribe to this channel. Your continuous support means a lot, so thank you guys so much. Let us begin with volume 1, which is The Sandman by Neil Gaiman, Preludes and Nocturnes. The link is previous if you haven't seen my full review of this already. First, I'll read you guys the blurb. The first of 12 volumes collecting the complete run of The Sandman begins a storytelling saga unique in graphic literature, introducing readers to a dark and enchanting world of dreams and nightmares, the home of Morpheus, the king of dreams, and his kin, the Endless. So in this one, as it says, it is an introduction to the Sandman himself, Morpheus. He is captured, he escapes, he then has to find 3 items which give him his power, and he has to overcome obstacles along the way. If you have seen my review on this first one, you'll know that overall, I thought it was okay, but lacking in tension for me, which is a common fault I've had with Neil Gaiman's writing, even though I adore him as a writer and he is a fantastic writer. The endings never seem as climactic as they should be. Now, the other major problem I had in this was the continuous sexism and the way women were described and used in this series. I hated. Personally, it is an older comic. We know there were problems in old writing, but I thought Neil Gaiman might be above them, but it was one of those things at the time. I think it was hard for anyone to not fall into these stereotypes. But full review, as I said, I've already put a link to. There's also a link below this video if you want to see the full review of this. But overall, I didn't hate it. It was all right for my first time reading a comic. And that takes us to number 2, The Sandman, the Doll's House. So this is the 2nd volume in this series. Now I'll read you guys the blurb. Collecting issues 9 to 16 of the original run of the series, The Doll's House follows a young woman named Rose Walker as she discovers the singular nature of her identity. Rose's journey is watched closely by the King of Dreams, for whom she becomes both an intriguing mystery and a deadly threat. I preferred this to the first one, possibly partly because the main character is a woman, and I got to see that Neil Gaiman doesn't always make women pathetic, but she is still quite pathetic and is still saved by male characters and is still threatened with rape, which is something I hate reading. I know it's a thing and it is powerful. I hate it. I find rape in books one of the hardest things to switch off from real life. As you know, I read epic fantasies. Death, torture, fine. Apparently that doesn't bother me, but rape scenes, if the world is nothing like our own or it is complete fantasy, it doesn't bother me as much. But when it is based in our world, and I know this is fantasy, but they're still, living in modern day times with TV shows and all the normal clothes that we wear, then I feel a bit more on edge about those scenes. Something that's also really interesting in this one is we bring back Unity, who in the first book is one of the children who falls into the endless sleep. She is raped in her sleep and then gives birth to a child, and that's who we find in this book as well. So I really liked how the comics are starting to overlap, and by reading them in order, you're going to start learning a lot more about these characters. Let's go into the first part, which is Doll's House Prologue. This prologue is the story of Morpheus and Naya, who is a mortal princess who he falls in love with, and he basically ruins her life. I didn't necessarily like it as a prologue. As a prologue, it seemed fairly pointless. Now that I've read further, I know this is an important story, but at the time of reading it, it just seems like a pointless interlude that maybe would have been better being said for that actual story. But I do understand, since it is a wider story that Neil Gaiman is trying to represent, why it was put there, which, as I say, when I first read it, meh. Now that I've read on, it makes sense. We then go on to Doll's House Part 1. In Part 1, we find out who Rose Walker is and that she travels to England to meet Unity, who is actually her lost grandmother. We also know that her brother Jed has been fostered and that Rose wants to find them. In Part 2, Rose travels back to America to find her brother Jed and ends up living in this house with lots of very interesting people. Those people are very unique and I hope come into play a lot more. We also see some of Jed's dreams here, which are quite fun. I'm going to skip Part 3. Basically, it just continues telling the story, which I don't want to tell you guys too much. I know I've said that this will have spoilers, but I don't need to tell you the full story. But you basically spend a lot of time in Jed's dream and you meet the hero that his dream has created, and you meet a woman who's pregnant and trapped in his dream. We then get to Part 4. Now this one was interesting. It was a really cool chapter, but because it's in between this story that is fully linked, it felt very out of place. Though I do absolutely love this character. Morpheus visited mortals with his sister Death, and when they did, they had a bit of a bet on to see if a mortal would ever ask for death. And then they make a mortal immortal, and he never asks for death. And every 100 years they meet in a pub, and every 100 years he says, "No, I still want to live. No matter how bad life is, he wants to keep living." So it's a really interesting chapter, but it did feel very oddly sandwiched in the middle of this story. After this, we end up back in the story of Rose Walker. She ends up traveling to a motel and ends up in a serial killer convention, which is where one of Dream's nightmares, who Dream is trying to catch, is at, who likes to steal people's eyes. Someone attempts to rape her. Another actual Dream character who is a place rescues her, and We then find that at the end of the story, Morpheus says that he needs to kill Rose, but then Unity ends up young and in Rose's dream, and Morpheus takes Unity instead of Rose, and Rose lives on. That is the ultimate story. Criticism is how often Rose goes from dressed to not dressed, but for no reason. In the dream, she ends up naked, but for no apparent reason. But it's not really understood why. I mean, personal experience, I don't tend to dream about myself naked. Some people might, but it seems just odd that in the same dream she's clothed, naked, and then clothed again. I don't quite see why. But the story seemed a bit more interesting. The climax, unlike the first, was not as easy to overcome. It still seemed like Morpheus arrives and done. Still way to an easier ending, but for Rose Walker herself, it was a lot harder, which in my opinion was a bit better. The Doll's House collection, I would give that 7 out of 10 stars. We then go to Sandman Volume 3, which is Dream Country. This one I want to call a palette cleanser. We're no longer following the main story that Neil Gaiman is working into these comics. We basically have 4 kind of short stories that are complete in themselves, 2 of which I liked and 2 of which were okay. I'll read you guys the blurb. 4 unique episodes form the tapestry of Dream Country. Calliope, A Dream of the Thousand Cats, Facade, and the acclaimed A Midsummer Night's Dream, the only comic book series ever to win the World Fantasy Award for Best Short Fiction. Also included is Gaiman's original script to Calliope, with annotations from both the writer and the artist. So story number 1 is, I'm gonna butcher this name, but Calliope? This is one I didn't like. You can kind of see why. Basically, Calliope is a woman from the dream world. She has powers. Anyone who has her in their control has amazing creativity. So she's basically captured by an author who abuses her and gets powers to write. She's then gifted to another author who immediately rapes her and shoves her in a room where she is basically naked the entire time. Now, Jill already explained how I feel about rape in modern day time, so that really hurt me reading. And also, was it not enough that they'd captured her and kept her imprisoned? Could they not have given her clothes and just kept her captive? Because that's all that happened to Dream when he was captured. Just saying. Why is it as soon as it's a female who's captured, we have to add rape in there? In the real world, men are raped too, but it's not normalized. Whereas women are raped, and they're also raped in the fantasy world because it's completely normal to rape a woman. Yeah, it doesn't sound right, does it? So reading it hurts. So for me, that kind of just ruined this story for me. Overall, it was okay, but having this woman who was raped and kept naked, and I just didn't need that at all. Didn't like it. Moving on, swiftly. We then have story 2, which is Dream of 1,000 Cats. You can already see the front page. You know I enjoyed this story. It has cats. What is there not to like? It is an adorable story about how cats used to rule the world and humans were their pets. And then the humans had hope and they dreamt that they were superior to the cats and they became superior to the cats. So one cat is trying to inform the other cats that they must dream of when they were in power, and therefore those humans will become their slaves. And ultimately, anyone who owns a cat, or knows someone who owns a cat, you try and tell me the human is not the slave to the cat. It is never the other way around. The cat does not serve the human. So it's quite a sweet take on just cats and how they are in real life and how they are in dreams, apparently. Story 3 is A Midsummer's Night Dream. This is the second story I actually didn't like in this comic. The thing is, A Midsummer Night's Dream is my favourite Shakespeare play. I adore it. I have watched it many times. I can read it many times. I loved A Midsummer's Night's Dream. So for me, this was just a retelling of A Midsummer's Night's Dream, which is a story that I already know. I understand that it links in to when Morpheus meets Shakespeare and makes a deal with Shakespeare to make him a good playwright, but I've already read A Midsummer's Night's Dream. I don't need the story again. That's just me. Ultimately, it is written well and it's fine. If you haven't read A Midsummer Night's Dream, I'm sure you'll love it. Even if you have, I'm pretty sure most people love that. I'm just a picky bugger. And finally, we have number 4 from this collection, and that is Facade. For me, this was a very beautiful and very sad story. It's about a woman who just looks different, and because of that she can't go outside. She wears fake faces to try and hide herself, but ultimately they fall off and she's exposed, and so she is so alone and she cannot die. She cannot end her life because her body constantly heals. And in this story, Death comes to visit her, and you know how much I love Death in this series as well. And she helps her and basically gets her through her misery and helps her end her life. What I love about that particular story is it's dealing with mental health issues and depression and physical illnesses in a time when that wasn't necessarily talked about. So I really appreciate that. So I quite enjoyed number 13. So for this collection, because it's 50-50 on how much I liked or disliked the books, I'll have to give it 5 out of 10 stars, even though I think the cat story was a 10. I thought the final story was a 10, but I really hated the first, and I did not enjoy A Midsummer's that much. So 5 out of 10 for this collection. And that takes us to volume 4, which is Season of Mists. In this one, we are returning to the normal Sandman story, so I'll read you guys the blurb first. 10,000 years ago, the King of Dreams condemned a woman who loved him to eternal damnation. In Season of Mists, the other members of his immortal family, the Endless, convinced him that this was an injustice. To correct it, he must journey to Hell and rescue his banished love, but Lucifer, the Lord of Hell, has sworn to destroy him, and Lucifer's plans are subtle. This goes back to the prologue of collection 2. The one that I said seemed not necessary is now necessary. That is the woman that Morpheus imprisoned in hell for 10,000 years. You see how I'm going with these. You have to read these comics in order and the stories are going to come back to bite you. This selection is just split into episodes 0 to 7 and they just go through the story of Morpheus dealing with his guilt for condemning this woman. So in episode 0, you meet all of Dream's family, bar one, and it is one member of the family who has disappeared and has not returned. In this, they have a dinner, Dream is ridiculed, Desire really has it in for him, and Death tells him how it was an injustice to imprison a woman for 10,000 years because she said no. I agree with Death. Why would you imprison someone for 10,000 years in hell when all she said was no, I do not want to join you in Dream World? He obviously takes refusal badly. This then goes into episode 1. In episode 1, it sounds like this is going to be an epic story. Dream sends a messenger to Lucifer to ask if he can come and he wants to free Naya, and Lucifer's basically like no, and Lucifer's making a scheme to destroy Dream, to take his powers, and Dream says I have to go regardless. Episode 2, we have anticlimax. When Morpheus gets to hell, it's empty. Lucifer is closing hell, which is very anticlimactic considering Lucifer had this grand scheme apparently to overthrow Dream, but it sounds like he's just leaving. Doesn't even hurt Dream, nothing, just he gives Dream hell. Oh no, what a shame, you've been given another realm. The only thing he does do is hides Naya from Morpheus, so he needs to find her. In episode 3, it's another build-up, so it's building tension here, because it goes through all the various immortals who want hell, and they've all decided they're going to go to Dream and get hell from him. So again, it feels like it's building, it's going to be epic. They're all quite evil, they've got these plans, they're going to get hell off of Dream. Then in episode 4, we sort of have an interlude, but it's an interesting one. Because hell has been closed, all the people who were dead in hell are coming back to the real world, and it follows a young boy in a boarding school. He's the only boy there because everyone else has gone home for a holiday and he has not, and all these dead students are coming back, and it's quite a sad but interesting story. I won't tell you too much because again, I know it's going to have spoilers in this, but I'm trying not to give you too many, so if you haven't read it, you've still got to read this to find out all the information. But it's an interlude I didn't mind, which is rare because, like with prologues, I don't like me an interlude. We then return to the main story with Dream in episode 5. Oh, episode 5. All of those people we met that sounded like it was going to be really epic, that really had it in for Morpheus, are arriving in the dream world, so Dream puts on a banquet. This seems less epic now. What I hated about this chapter was how the goddesses and these immortal women are treated by the immortal men. Like, they're all provocative and just horrible. And the most that happens is Morpheus apologizes to one Egyptian goddess and she says, oh, it doesn't matter. It does matter! It is this attitude of, it doesn't matter, everyone's rude and everyone's, gonna be horrible to me because I'm female and that's just what it's like. That's not what it should be like, and we cannot normalize this anymore. That's why we have so many problems. It is completely normalized for these goddesses to be objectified, even though they are as powerful or more powerful than these male gods. Rant over, I apologize. You can see how much this hurts me. I did not enjoy this chapter. They are goddesses. I wanted power and respect, not the same old bullshit I've had the rest of the time through these books. In this, everyone then offers Dream a trade or threatens him or offers information to swap for the keys to hell. The good thing is there are threats in there. That's quite epic. So if he gives it to one, that one's going to destroy his realm. If he gives it to this one, that one's going to give away his secrets. Quite interesting. We then get on to episode 6, which is So Is That It? That's just how it feels. So everyone has offered Dream something for hell. Dream is then considering these offers, and then God sends 2 angels and they say, we want hell. God has decided that we are now going to take over hell. So Morpheus gives them the key. He tells all these other immortals, God wants it, God owns it, there you go. And they all just say, okay. The only epic thing is that then the demons from hell try to keep Naya and instead Morpheus goes in there and saves Naya from hell. That's the only interesting thing. That's literally it. That is the end of something that could have been so epic. We then have the final episode, which episode 7, but it's not 7, it's the weird shape sideways 8. I can't remember what it means, so tell me in the comments. Brain died. I also hated this chapter because the angels are cool, but you get the conversation between Morpheus and Nada. Now, literally, she's very angry with him, of course. She's been in prison for 10,000 years for saying no to the King of Dreams. He then says sorry once, and then they're kissing. I don't even think I need to discuss how wrong that is, and how all that is saying is that women can't say no because you'll be punished. But you know, as soon as a man says sorry, you should forgive them and want to sleep with them again because they said the sorry word, even though they've imprisoned you for 10,000 years and were basically abusive and horrible. I hated it. So for this one, overall, I found it honestly disappointing. I was sad. It promised to be so epic, and I think the thing it's done is it's told us that Desire has something against Dream. There is something epic possibly going to happen, but it's not in this one. So for me, this was I'm gonna say 4 out of 10 stars. And finally, for this big comic book review, we have number 5 of the Sandman series, which is A Game of You. And honestly, this was my favorite so far. It made up for collection 4 for me. It still had a few issues, but they were a lot better than they were in the previous books. Neil Gaiman has obviously started to see some kind of trend and has started to deal with it, which was greatly appreciated. Much better, strong female protagonists, much better. I won't break this into chapters because it is more like reading a book, because every single chapter leads on to the next, which again is just more book form, so it flowed like an entire story. I'll read you guys the blurb. In A Game of You, the imagined landscapes of childhood are transformed into the battleground for a deadly contest of wills. As cracks appear in the wall that separates the waking world from the dreaming, a group of young New Yorkers are drawn inexorably through the gaps into a long-forgotten corner of the Dream King's realm, a setting that is both eerily familiar and disturbingly malignant. So this is the story of Barbie. Barbie is a character that we met in Collection 2, A Doll's House. She is one of the people who lived in the house full of the very interesting characters. Barbie is so interesting. She's quite an odd person, but I absolutely love her best friend. Her best friend, Wanda, is the best person ever. She is so awesome with Barbie and takes care of her and helps her, and honestly is just lovely. I found the dream characters created from Barbie's world were very well imagined and rounded. So I did feel something when they were killed. It did hurt, and it was good to finally feel something for characters in these comics, because until this point I didn't really care about anyone other than death, to be honest. In this book, Barbie has to go into her dreams and finds a young version of herself who is destroying her dreams, and she has to stop her. Ultimately, it's the same as the others with the click ending of Morpheus appears, clicks his fingers, and voila, we're done. But what happens to Barbie emotionally and mentally doesn't end, and it is a really good character arc and growth. A few things that were, in my point of view, errors was 3 women went into Barbie's dream whilst Wanda stayed behind to watch over Barbie's body. She also ended up helping a homeless lady and talked to the dead man's head, and ultimately died, which was so horrible. I felt for Wanda. I didn't want that end for Wanda. But what was odd was Wanda couldn't go into Barbie's dream because physically she was still a man. She hadn't undergone the operation. She was so frightened of them, which is totally fair. So she couldn't enter Barbie's dream. The 3 women could, and they had to use the period blood of one of these women. Now, the one issue I have, and this is probably with the illustrator more than Neil Gaiman, is the one woman whose blood they use from her period is the only woman who is apparently sleeping naked in this book. I can't speak for all the women in the world, but for me personally, I would never sleep naked on my period. That is a recipe for disaster. You're just gonna get bloodied sheets, stains. It's not a stop-start bleed for most people. It's gonna keep flowing. So I kind of just had a flaw there of The illustrator obviously just wanted someone naked, because in every single book there's one woman naked at least, but that was not the correct choice to choose to be naked, if we're honest. Most women do not sleep naked on their period as far as I'm aware. I apologise if I'm wrong on this, and if you do, you are so brave. I commend you. I can't. I'm gonna stain something. As I said previous, again, it's a really good build. This one builds so well. It just keeps going and going, and tension rises and rises. But with the Morpheus arrives and fixes it kind of end. But I do absolutely love Wanda. Wanda is my favourite character. I need Wanda. But overall, this was the best one so far for me. So I would give it 8 out of 10 stars. And there you have it. The reviews for 5 of the Sandman Neil Gaiman comic series. Would I continue reading them? Yes, but I'm not desperate to. Matt is a massive Neil Gaiman fan, so I've bought most of these for Matt for birthdays and Christmases. I will continue to buy them for him, and I will continue to read them. I am not necessarily gripped. I do want to know the overall story, but mainly I just hope that in the later comics there is a lot less sexism in these comics, please. But that's it for this massive comic book review. I hope you guys enjoyed that. There is a TV series now of The Sandman, which I am currently watching, and I will be comparing it to these comics. I have very high hopes for it. I think 1 to 5 of The Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. You have my reviews. I would recommend going to read them. They're very interesting, but be prepared for the level of sexism in these books. It's not like reading a modern book, and it does remind me why I probably have not read comics up to this point. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed what you see. If you like this channel, don't forget to subscribe. If you like to see as soon as I upload, click the little bell down below. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. I post around bookish pictures as well as my writing tips and unboxings on there. And thanks for watching, guys. Bye!